Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We are holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We are continuing to learn, Hilchos Chol HaMoed, and actually we are concluding Hilchos Chol HaMoed today, and we will start to learn Hilchos Tishah B'Av, U'Sha'ar Taniyos. So today is really a significant accomplishment. We have learned the entire Hilchos Chol HaMoed. Okay, well, let's get on with it. So we are on Daf Chav Beis Amud Beis, and we begin with Siman Tav Kuf Mem Ches Sif Chaf. Now, we have learned previously, if somebody loses a close relative, one of the relatives that he is required to sit Shiva for before Sukkot, and then he sits Shiva for a short time on Erev Sukkot. So we said that there's a very interesting calculation we make to figure out when Shloshim is over. We said that the few minutes of Shiva that he sits on Erev Sukkot is worth 7 days. Then we have the 7 days of Sukkot itself running from the first day of Sukkot through Hoshana Rabbah. Then Shmini Atzeres is also worth 7 days. And then finally we have Simchas Torah, which is worth 1 day. So we have 7 days on Erev Yom Tov when he sat Shiva, 7 days of Sukkot through Hoshana Rabbah, that's 14, 7 days of Shmini Atzeres, that's 21, and then Simchas Torah, which is 22, and he would have to keep another 8 days of Shloshim, and then 8 days later he completes the Shloshim period of Avelus. Now, the Mechaber is going to just point out that there's a small caveat, not really a caveat to that situation, but there's another situation when the Yom Tov is not going to be worth quite as many days towards the Shloshim as that. Says the Mechaber on the top line of Chav Beis Amud Beis in Siv Chaf, Im Asar Yomim Achar HaChag, if 10 days after Sukkot, Shama Shemeis Lo Meis Be'erev HaChag, a person hears that one of his close relatives passed away on Erev Yom Tov. Okay, so it's now 10 days after Sukkot, and he hears that somebody passed away on Erev Sukkot. Well, that's a Shmua Kroiva. He's receiving the news of a recent loss. And the Mechaber points out that you might think that it should have a din of a Shmua Rechaika. You might think that it should have a din of old news, in which case you don't sit Shiva, you only keep Avelus for a very short amount of time. The Mechaber says that no, this is actually a Shmua Kroiva, and you would have to sit Shiva now. Explains the Mechaber. Even though, if you would use the type of counting that I mentioned in the beginning of this year, you might be tempted to say like this. This person is now finding out that his close relative died on Erev Sukkot. So he's going to remember what we learned yesterday, and he's going to say like this. Okay, Erev Sukkot is worth 7 days. Sukkot is worth 7 days, that's 14. Shmini Atzeres is worth 7 days, that's 21. Simchas Torah is another day, that's 22. And now it's 10 days later. That means it's already after 30 days. If it's after 30 days, that means this is a Shmua Rechaika. Says the Mechaber, no. Despite the fact that if you would count Erev Sukkot as being 7 days, V'shivas Yemei HaChag, and then you would count the 7 days of Yom Tov through Hoshana Rabbah, V'yom Shmini Atzeres, and then you would count Shmini Atzeres for 7, Esrim Ve'echad, you would come up with a count of 21, V'asar Yomim Acherim, and now we said that in this case he heard about the loss 10 days later, Harei Shloshim Ve'echad, to give you a total of 31, Ein Lozeh Din Shmua Rechaika. That's not the way we count in this case, and this is not considered a Shmua Rechaika. Elo Din Shmua Kroiva. Rather, this is considered a Shmua Kroiva because we don't give Erev Sukkot the value of 7 days. Why? Because he didn't sit Shiva on Erev Sukkot. He didn't even know about the loss on Erev Sukkot. So Erev Sukkot was not worth 7 days. The days of Yom Tov were worth 7 days, but Shmini Atzeres is also not worth 7 days. Shmini Atzeres is worth 7 days if you're already in middle of Avelus and Shmini Atzeres comes along. Then Shmini Atzeres is worth 7 days. But if you didn't even start Avelus, you didn't even know about your loss, then Shmini Atzeres is not worth 7 days. She'ena regel oila lemisha le'nag Avelus kaidem le'klal. Because Shmini Atzeres, the Yom Tov of Shmini Atzeres, does not count as 7 days if you're not in the middle of Avelus. And also, Erev Sukkot is not worth 7 days if you weren't being Noyeg Avelus. Certainly not in this case where the person didn't even know that his relative passed away. And therefore, in this case that the Mechaber delineates here, this is considered a Shmua Kroiva. It's considered a report of a recent loss, and this person would have to sit down, and he would have to keep Shiva, and then he would have to keep Shloshim. Okay. Says the Chavetz Chaim in Mishnah Berurah, Oiskat Nun Gimel. There's one Mishnah Berurah here. So this is the final Mishnah Berurah in Hilchos Chol HaMoed. She'ena regel oila mikal makom. The Mechaber does give a similar type of case where this is not true. When mikal makom, yoledes shemeis la meis. Let's say you have a woman who gave birth, and then she loses one of her close relatives while she's a kimpaturin, while she's recovering. Shechayeves l'hisabel olav. Shemeis la meis shechayeves l'hisabel olav. The yoledes, the woman who gave birth, loses a relative that she's mechuyev to sit shiva for. V'hu adin sha'ar chayla, or a different ill individual, not just a woman who gave birth, could be another sick individual, finds out that he lost one of the relatives he has to sit shiva for. V'i efshar lehen l'hisabel machmas chalishusan. But they cannot be noyeg avelus, they're simply too weak to be noyeg avelus. Kevan shehem yadu mizeh, since they were aware of the loss. Ach machmas oines I efshar lehen linoyeg avelus, and the only reason they weren't noyeg avelus was because of an oines. They weren't noyeg avelus because they simply were not able to. V'haregel paga b'soich shiva, and Yom Tov falls out in the midst of what would have been Shiva. So let's say a Yoledes or another ill individual loses one of their close relatives 2 days before Sukkot, and they know about the loss, and really they would sit Shiva, but they can't. They're too ill to sit Shiva. In that case, even though they weren't Noyeg Shiva, even though they didn't start the Shiva before Yom Tov will still break the Shiva. Batal mehen gzera Shiva, v'hu adin le'inyan shloshim, and the same halacha would apply to the shloshim. If they were aware of the loss and the shloshim started before Yom Tov would break the shloshim even if they're not being Noyeg Avelus, so long as the reason they're not being Noyeg Avelus is because of an oinus. If they wouldn't be keeping Shiva, but they're doing it b'mezid, if they're able to sit Shiva, but b'mezid they decided not to be Noyeg Avelus, then the Yom Tov does not break the Avelus. The rest of the details of the halachos of Avelus and how they may coincide or interact with Yom Tov, Mevurah kol b'yardeh siman shin tzadites ayin sham. So to me, this is a very momentous occasion. We've completed the learning of Hilchos Chol HaMoed. I think that for many people, there's a tremendous amount of chidush in learning Hilchos Chol HaMoed. A lot of people think that Chol HaMoed is a weekday. It's a weekday, but davening is a little bit longer. And we have laning and we daven musaf. But it's really a weekday. And we see here, learning Hilchos Chol HaMoed, that quite the opposite is true. Chol HaMoed is a Yom Tov, but we have a heter to do certain things on Chol HaMoed. So you see the difference in perspective. It's not that really it's a weekday and everything is mutter and there are a couple of things that are asur. Really it's Yom Tov, but we have heterim. We have different heterim that allow us to do certain malachos. It behooves us, the next Yom Tov that we come to, the next Chol HaMoed that we come to, we should all come to Chol HaMoed Pesach in good health. When we come to Chol HaMoed Pesach, we really have to take advantage of those days, like we learned early on in Hilchos Chol HaMoed. The reason we have Chol HaMoed, we have that time so that we should be able to be oisik in Torah and Tefillah. We should be able to spend time with our families, but it's supposed to be Yom Tov time. There's supposed to be a focus on ruchnius, not on gashmius. And it behooves us when we come around to Chol HaMoed to ask ourselves, what are we focusing on during Chol HaMoed? It's fine to go spend time with the kids, but it's like I learned early on from my Rebbe, from Reb Ruben Zalazan Gesund. He used to take the grandchildren, earlier on the children, to the Bronx Zoo on Chol HaMoed. But what would he do in the Bronx Zoo? He would take them over to the petting zoo, and he would show them the split hooves of the animals, and how you know which animal is kosher and which animal is treif, and take a look at the animals that are roy for a carbon. This is the type of animal you would use for a carbon. How old is it? Which carbonis is it roy for? And you could have a focus on ruchnius, not a focus on gashmius. And we have to ask ourselves, every time we're about to do a malacha on Chol HaMoed, we have to ask ourselves, okay, is this mutter or not? Is it a tzarech hamayid or not? Is it a tzarech rabim or not? Is it a davar ha'avid or not? We have to plug in the rules, and we have to figure out the malacha that we're about to do. Is it mutter? Is it asur? Something like turning on a light probably falls under the category of a malacha she'ein by tercha klal, which we learned in the Mishnah Berurah earlier. The Mishnah Berurah, we learned the halacha of a gavshushis. If somebody has an earthen floor in their house and there's a mound and they want to level out the mound, they want to take the mound off. So the Mishnah Berurah, the Mechaber said it's mutter, it's 100% mutter. And the Mishnah Berurah said, why is it mutter? It's 100% a malacha. If you would do that on Shabbos, it would be an issa daraisa. So the Mishnah Berurah said, because it's a malacha she'ein by tercha klal. So there are certain types of malacha, like turning on a light. You don't have to question, according to most poskim, whether or not you're allowed to turn on a light. Although there are poskim who turn their lights on before. But you don't have to question whether or not you could turn on a light, because that's a malacha she'ein by tercha klal. But we really do have to ask ourselves when we do different things on Chol HaMoed, is this mutter or is it not? Okay. I wanted to mention that our learning should also serve as a schus for refuah shalema for our dear friend Shlomo Zalman ben Mesha. And you should have a refuah shalema b'sai shar chil Yisrael is going in for a procedure tomorrow. Miras Hashem, it should go well, or even better yet, they should decide that it's not even necessary. Okay, Hilchos Tishah B'Av u'sha'ar taniyos. Now we're really going from Hilchos Avelus into the halachos of national Avelus. We go into Hilchos Tishah B'Av u'sha'ar taniyos, the halachos that govern Tishah B'Av and other fast days. And it's our hope that these halachas should no longer be nageya. The Rabbanan Shalom should turn Tishah B'Av and the other three of the Dalet Tanesim into days of Yom Tov, Yemei Sasain v'Simcha, like it's brought down in the Navi. The Navi says that those days will be turned from days of mourning into days of Sasain v'Simcha. Miras Hashem, we should be zocheh to see that b'mehera v'yameinu. Siman Tavkuf Mem Tes l'hisanes arbat tzomos. The obligation to fast the 4 main fast days of Boibei Seifim, and here we have 2 Seifim. Says the Mechaber, Chayavim lihisanois b'Tisha B'Av, we are obligated to fast on Tisha B'Av, u'b'Shiva Asar b'Tammuz, and on the 17th day of Tammuz, u'b'Shloisha b'Tishrei, on the 3rd day of Tishrei, the day after Rosh Hashanah, Tzom Gedalia, u'b'Asara b'Teves, and on the 10th day of Teves, Mipnei dvarim hara'im she'eru bahem, due to the terrible calamities that befell Klal Yisrael on those days. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Aleph. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Chayavim lehisanois, we are obligated to fast on these days. Where does this obligation come from? What's the source of this obligation? Says the Chavetz Chaim, V'hu midivrei hanavim. This comes from the words of the Nevi'im, Kediksiv Bikra, as it says in the pasuk in Zechariah, Tzom haravi, the 4th fast, V'tzom hachamishi, well, really, the fast of the 4th, V'tzom hachamishi, the fast of the 5th, V'tzom hashvi, the fast of the 7th, V'tzom ha'asiri, and the fast of the 10th. V'amru Chazal, and the Chazal tell us in Masechtas Rosh Hashanah, and Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, Tzom haravi, what is meant by the fast of the 4th? Zeh Shiva Asar b'Tammuz, this is a reference to the 17th day of Tammuz, Shehu b'Chodesh Revi Leminyan HaChadoshim, which falls out in the 4th month according to the count of the months. Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz. Tammuz is the 4th month. So the Tzayim Haravi, the fast of the 4th, is the 17th day of Tammuz, the 4th month. V'Tzayim HaChamishi, similarly, the fast of the 5th, Zeh Tishah B'Av, this is the 9th day of Av, Shehu B'Chodesh HaChamishi. Av is the 5th month on the Yiddish calendar. V'Tzayim HaShavi, and the fast of the 7th, Zeh Tzayim Gedalia, this is a reference to the 3rd day of Tishrei, known as Tzayim Gedalia, Shehu B'Chodesh HaShvi, which falls down in Tishrei, which is the 7th month. V'Tzayim HaAsiri, and the fast of the 10th, Zeh Asara B'Teves, this is a reference to the 10th day of Teves, Shehu B'Chodesh HaAsiri, Teves is the 10th month of the Jewish year. V'chal elu hayamim, on all of these days, Kol Yisrael mis'anin b'hem, every Yid fasts on these days, mipnei atzaros she'eru b'hem, because of the terrible tzaros that fell out on those days. And now the Mishnah Berurah says, so what? Terrible calamities happened on those days, but why is that a cause for fasting? Why is that a cause for not eating and not drinking? And the Chavetz Chaim is going to tell us the opinion of the Rambam. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Kedei le'orer halavavos, we fast in order to arouse our hearts, lefakeach al darkei hatshuva, to think and to analyze the need to do tshuva. The fasting will make us remember our wrong deeds, the things that we have done that are wrong. And the deeds of our forefathers that were not proper, that are like our deeds now, that are improper, until our ill deeds caused the calamities that happened then and the calamities that continue to occur to this day. Let's remember what Chazal say. Chazal tell us that any generation during which the Beis HaMikdash is not rebuilt is a generation where the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. There's no difference between the Beis HaMikdash not being rebuilt and the Beis HaMikdash being destroyed. Either way, it means that our generation is not roy for the Beis HaMikdash. So if we had one, it would be never destroyed. We don't have one, but it's not being rebuilt. So there's no difference, apparently, between our deeds now and the deeds of our forefathers then in the time of the Churbanos. And why do we want to remember this? Why do we fast in order to remember this? Shebezichrayin hadvarim elu, because by remembering these things, nashuv lehetiv. The hope is that we will do tshuva and we will return to doing good. We'll return to doing what's proper in the eyes of the Rabbeinu Shalom. K'moshe Nemar, like the pasuk says, v'hisvadu es avoinam avoisam, that the Klal Yisrael, they will do vidui, they will admit their averis and the averis of their forefathers, and it will bring them to do tshuva. V'lachein, and therefore, chayiv kol ish lasam el libay ba'oisan hayamim, every person has to place front and foremost on their hearts during those days, ulafashvesh b'maisav, to search through their actions and their deeds, v'lashuv behen, and to do tshuva, ki eino ikar hatainus, because certainly the Rambam says the main thing on those days is not refraining from eating and drinking. Simply refraining from eating and drinking doesn't accomplish anything. We can see this in the Navi, in Yoina, when the pasuk discusses what happened in the city of Nineveh. It says, Vayar Hashem es ma'asehem. Hashem saw their deeds. Hashem saw that the people of Nineveh did tshuva, and they changed their deeds. And that's why Hashem decided not to destroy the city. V'amru Chazal, and Chazal point out in Masechtas Tainus, es sakam ve'es tanisam loy nemar. It does not say that Hashem saw their sackcloth. It does not say that Hashem saw that they were fasting. Loy nemar ela es masehem. It says that Hashem saw their deeds. What does it mean that Hashem saw their deeds? Hashem saw that they changed their ways. And instead of doing chatoim, they did tshuva on their chatoim. And now they were acting in a proper manner. That's what Hashem saw, and that's why Hashem spared them. Ve'en hatainus ela hachana l'tshuva. The fasting is a preparation of doing tshuva. By fasting, it makes us remember the things that we've done that are wrong. It also brings us into a position of humility. It arouses in us a hachna, a humility and a humbleness, where we realize that we are low and we have a need to do tshuva. And we come to the Rabbeinu Shalom out of hachna, out of humility, and we approach the Rabbeinu Shalom in tshuva. Lachein, therefore, Oisan ha'anoshim, those people, shekishehem misanim, on these days when they fast, holchim betil, they go on a trip, they go for a walk, ubedvarim betelim, or they spend their days on frivolity. Tafsu hatafel, they are grabbing onto the tafel. They're grabbing onto the peripheral issues of the day. They're grabbing onto the peripheral fast. V'hinichu ha'ikr, but they are casting aside the main point of the fast, which is the doing tshuva. Umikamakin, nevertheless, ein lifter es atzmai b'tshuva b'vad. One should not think, okay, I learned this Mishnah Berurah who tells me that the ikr of the day is tshuva, not the fast, so I'll do tshuva, but I won't bother fasting. You can't do that either. Ki yamim elu he mitzvahs hasei midivrei hanavim leis anois behem, because the Chavetz Chaim says, like he opened up this Mishnah Berurah with, he said the need to fast on these days is a takana of the Nevi'im. So we have a mitzvah sasei from the Nevi'im to fast on those days, and we should not belittle that. U'kamay shekasavnu lamarla, as we wrote above. So this is something which is very important and incumbent upon us to remember. All too many times you see that on especially the long fast days during the summer, when people might be up in their summer homes and in the bungalow colonies, Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, and on Tishah B'Av, Tishah B'Av, you have the long morning of Kinnis, but then you have the long afternoon, and people say, okay, it's a tinus, what should I do? I can't work. And they break out the Scrabble games, and they go and they start cooking and they start baking. But we have to remember that these are days that we have to do tshuva. Now, the Rambam, most of this is taken from the Rambam. The Rambam is very clear that these 4 fast days are fast days of tshuva. The Ritva writes that they're fast days of avelus. But even fast days of avelus, what does the Ritva mean? What's the point of avelus? There's no point of being misabel. There's no point of just mourning for the sake of mourning. That somebody would be tempted to say is crying over spilled milk. The point of mourning is we mourn to remember what we lost. We mourn to recognize and acknowledge what we're missing, that we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, that we don't have the Shechina Shruya B'Seichenu, we don't have the divine presence amongst us. We can't bring karbanos. We can't get the kapara of karbanos. We have whole chalokim of the Torah HaKadoshah that we can't be Mekayim. Every Shabbos we can't bring a carbon musaf. Somebody does a chet, he can't bring a carbon chatas. All the dinim of Tumah and Tahara. These are all chalokim of the Torah HaKadoshah that we're missing. We have to be misabel because we have to acknowledge what it is that we're missing. And when we acknowledge and recognize what it is that we're missing, then we have to take the natural next step, which is we have to ask ourselves, what do we need to do to get it back? And that's tshuva. So that's the point of the avelus. Even according to the Ritva, the point of having a tinus for avelus is so that we should be misabel, and it should arouse in ourselves a recognition that we're missing something and we need to get it back. I always ask, we're living during this bitter gullus. Where's the urgency? Where's the urgency? Why aren't people saying every day, oy vey, what do we have to do to bring Mashiach? Mashiach still hasn't come. What do we have to do? What can I do different today than what I did yesterday? What can I do to help hasten the coming of Mashiach? So there has to be an urgency. There has to be a recognition of what it is that we don't have. I always say when I speak during the 3 weeks, or when I speak around the time of Tishah B'Av, I always point out that it's brought down that the different kalim and the different avodos that were done in the Beis Hamikdash, what they did for us, the shulchan was the source of our parnasa. When you had a Beis Hamikdash and you had a shulchan with the lechem apanim in the heichel, in the Beis Hamikdash, that brought a hashpah of parnasa to Klal Yisrael. Parnasa was easier for Klal Yisrael when there was a shulchan with the lechem apanim in the heichel in the Beis Hamikdash. When we had a menorah in the Heichal and the Beis HaMikdash, Kiner Mitzvah V'Torah Or, it was easier to figure out a Shveratosis. The hashba of Torah, there was a hashba of Torah that we don't have now because we don't have the Beis HaMikdash. And when you had an Aron HaKodesh in the Kodesh Kodshim in the Beis HaMikdash, I always point out, the Chazal say, always a fascinating nace, the Chazal say that the Aron HaKodesh was Eina Min Hamida. It didn't take up any space in the Kodesh Kodshim. So that if you went into the Kodesh Kodshim with a tape measure and you measured from one wall to the other wall, you would get a measurement. And then if you went to the Aron Kodesh and you measured from one side of the Aron Kodesh to the side wall, and from the other side of the Aron Kodesh to the other side wall, and you took those two numbers and you added them together, you got the total width of the Kodesh Kodshim. How does that work? But the Aron Kodesh is sitting in the middle. The Aron HaKodesh took up no physical space. It's such an odd miracle, such an odd nace. The Aron HaKodesh took up no physical space. It's a strange miracle. What's the point of that miracle? I always say the point of that miracle is that you need to understand that the Aron HaKodesh in the Kodesh Kodshim was the point of intersection between the Olam Hagashmi and the Olam Haruchni, between the physical world and the spiritual world. And the Aron HaKodesh was a one-of-a-kind creation. The Aron HaKodesh was something which was physical in nature. It's something that was made by man. It's something that's made out of materials, out of gold, out of cedar wood that came from this world. They're physical in nature. Yet, it was something that was uplifted to the extent where it became spiritual to the extent that it took up no physical space. So here you had, in this world, you had a point of intersection between the world of the physical, the Olam Hagashmi, and the world of the spiritual, the Olam Haruchni. You know what that did for us? What that did for us was, it made it easier for each and every one of us to be successful in our constant milchama between the Olam Hagashmi and the Olam Haruchni. Because you and I and every human being are just like that Aron in the Kodesh Kodshim. What do I mean? We are also a point of intersection between the Olam Hagashmi and the Olam Haruchni. We have a guf that's Magushim. We have a guf that's a Dvar Gashmi. It's something which is physical in nature. But Vayipach Ba'apav Nishmas Ruachayim. But the Rebbeinu Shalom took a neshama, a chelik elikami mal. The Rebbeinu Shalom took a spiritual neshama and blew it into our guf. So our guf is a point of intersection between the Olam Haruchni and the Olam Hagashmi. And then, like the Mesilas Yesharim says, our constant battle, our everyday milchama, is what is going to take precedence, which one is going to be victorious. Is the Gashmi factor of our existence going to be victorious? Are we, chas v'chalila, going to follow the physical nature of our being? Or is the Nishmas Ruachayim, is the Ruchni factor of our being, is that going to be victorious? And are we going to follow our spiritual nature? If we do, then we can uplift our guf. We could even turn our guf into a dvar ruchni. And you can see that in the Tosfos and Bavli and also Gemara and Yerushalmi that says that on the day that Rebbe died, they announced Ein Tuma Hayom. They said that even a Kohen could go ahead and be misasik with Rebbe, even though a Kohen is not allowed to be metamet to a mace if it's not one of his close relatives. But they said that Rebbe's guf did not transmit Tumah. Why? Because the reason a mace transmits Tumah, the Rabbeinu Bechaya says, is because when somebody dies and the spiritual part of that being, when the neshama is removed from the guf, which is a dvar gashmi, what you are now left with is something which is pure gashmi. Pure gashmi transmits Tumah. That's what transmits Tumah. So as long as the neshama was in the guf, it didn't transmit Tumah. But when the neshama, when the ruchni is taken out of the guf, now it transmits Tumah. But by Rebbe's guf did not transmit tumah. Why? Because Rebbe elevated even his guf, and he turned his guf into a dvar ruchni. He made his guf the equal of his neshama. So again, we are also the point of intersection between the olam ruchni and the olam agashmi. As long as we had an Aron Kodesh in the Kachay Kachim on the Har HaBayis in Yerushalayim, it was easier for us that our neshama should have the victory over the guf. Once we lost the Beis HaMikdash and we don't have that Aron HaKodesh in the Kachay Kachim present in this world, our task becomes much more difficult. So these are the things that we are missing because of the Churban Bayis. And these are the things that we have to acknowledge and be misabel on. And when we are misabel on them, it has to arouse in us the need, the recognition of the need to do tshuva and to do whatever we can so that we should inspire and we should have the Rebbeinu Shalom bring us back a Beis HaMikdash, and we should be zocheh to the Bias Kol Tzedek. Okay. Now let's go weiter. We go to Mishnah Berurah, Ice Cotton Bays. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the Mechaber said, we fast on these days. So again, these days are Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, Tishah B'Av, Tzom Gedalia, and Asar B'Teves. The Mechaber said we fast Mipnei Dvarim Haroyim, because of the evil things that befell our nation on those days. Now the Chavetz Chaim explains what those are. Ki b'Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, on the 7th day of Tammuz, Eru B'Y Chamesh Tsaros, we experienced 5 calamities. B'Y Nishtabru HaLuchos, on that day, Moshe Rabbeinu broke the Luchos HaRishonos. Kisha Yorad Moshe min Hahar, when Moshe Rabbeinu came down from Har Sinai and he witnessed the Egel and the nation worshipping the Egel, he cast down the Luchos HaRishonos and he shattered them at the feet of Har Sinai. Kamafurish b'Torah. Ubutal atamid oid milahakriv b'bayis harishon. And during the days of the Bayis Rishon, during the days that led up to the Churban of Bayis Rishon, on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, they were no longer able to bring the daily carbon tamid in the Beis HaMikdash. Vehuvka ha'ir b'Churban Bayis Sheni. And during the run-up to the Churban Bayis Sheni, the city of Yerushalayim was breached on the 17th day of Tammuz. V'saraf Afustamus harasha es HaTorah, and Afustamus, so according to most, I think, was a Greek general during the days of the first Churban. He burnt either the Sefer Torah of Ezra, that would be Bayis Sheni. I guess if it was the Sefer Torah of Ezra, so it would be talking about the second bias. If it's a Fustamus, it's talking about the first bias. Either he burnt a Sefer Torah, some say he burnt all the Sefer Torah he could find, others say that he burnt the Sefer Torah of Ezra, which was the key Sefer Torah, national Sefer Torah, that was kept in the Heichal, and all Sefer Torah were corrected against that Sefer Torah. The Huamad Tzelem B'Heichal, and somebody, either Menashe or Afustamus, erected an idol in the Heichel of the Beis HaMikdash. Ube Tishah B'Av, and on Tishah B'Av, Haya by Churban HaGadol, Shenechrav by Abayis HaRishon. On Tishah B'Av, that's when the Churban Bayis Rishon took place. The Gam HaSheni, also the Churban Bayis Sheni. Ubezeh HaYoim Nigzar Alav Yiseinu Shabamidbar Shelo Yichnusu La'aretz. And also on Tishah B'Av, that was the day when at the time of the Meraglim, the Klal Yisrael cried a Bechia Shel Chinam. They cried a meaningless crying, a baseless crying, when they cried and they said that the Rebbeinu Shalom would not be able, Chas v'Chalila, to take them into Eretz Yisrael, and the Rebbeinu Shalom was geyser on Klal Yisrael. You cried a Bechia Shel Chinam. I'm going to be geyser that this day of Tishah B'Av is going to be a national day of Bechia for all time. And also on Tishah B'Av, the city of Beitar was destroyed. There were tens of thousands of Yidden, and they all fell to the non-Jews, and they were all slaughtered. And on that day, which has long been prepared for the punishment of Klal Yisrael, Tanisropus Harasha, a Roman, he plowed the area of the Heichal ve'Sevivav, Lekayam Ashenemar Tzion Sada Techaresh. V'yom Gimel b'Tishrei, and on the third day of Tishrei, by Nara Gedalia ben Achikam, that's when Gedalia ben Achikam had been killed. Sheminu l'Roish la'achar ha'churban, he had been appointed as the leader of the Yidden that remained in Eretz Yisrael. Al ha'pleita hanisheres, v'nichba gacheles Yisrael hanishara, and when he was killed, the remaining burning coal of Klal Yisrael that remained in Eretz Yisrael was extinguished. Kal Yidei Nerag, because as a result of his murder, Galu Kulam, the remnants that remained in Eretz Yisrael were all exiled. V'nergu mehem la'alafim, and thousands of them were killed. V'asara b'tevis, and then lastly we have Asara b'tevis. Shabai Samach Melech Bavel Nebuchadnezzar Harasha al Yerushalayim. At that time, Nebuchadnezzar Harasha came and laid siege to Yerushalayim. Ve'avia b'matzar u'v'matzar, he laid a siege. U'mizen nimshach ha'churban, and from that siege came about the churban. Finally, the Mechaber said over here, Dvarim haroim she'eru bahem. These are the terrible things that happened on those days. Says the Mishnah Berurah Cut Gimel Misha Tava Achal Bahem. If somebody inadvertently does eat on one of these fast days, nevertheless, don't think if you got up in the morning and you accidentally had a coffee that now it exempts you from the rest of the fast. No, you still need to fast. The classic example, if somebody ate garlic and now it gave him bad breath, should he go eat more garlic and make his breath even worse? If you did something that you weren't supposed to do, you had a coffee in the morning of the tinus, don't go eat a piece of cake now, you still have to fast. And whether or not you have to fast another day to make up for this one, we'll see that Mirz Hashem when we hit Siman Tavkov Samaches of the Mishnah Berurah. Okay, let's go to Sif Beis, since we do still have a little extra time, and we have a short Sif here with only a couple of lines of Mishnah Berurah. Let's complete the Siman. Says the Mechaber, Avagav diksiv b'kra, even though the pasuk in Yirmiyah says, B'chodesh haravi b'tisha l'chodesh hafka ha'ir, in the fourth month, in the month of Tammuz, on the 9th day of the month, the city was breached. Ein misanin b'tisha b'av, we do not fast on the 9th of Tammuz, elo b'shiva asar, we fast on the 17th of Tammuz. Memnei she'af al pisha b'rishayna hufka b'tisha b'av, because while the pasuk in Yirmiyah is certainly true, and during the days of the Bayis Rishon, the city was breached on the 9th day of Tammuz, since by the Churban Bayis Sheni the city was breached on the 17th, the Nevi'im were masakin that we should fast on the 17th of Tammuz, mishum the Churban Bayis Sheni Chamerlon, because for us who are still living through the bitter gullus that began with the Churban Bayis Sheni, the Churban Bayis Sheni is more stringent for us than the Churban Bayis Rishon, so we commemorate what took place by the Churban Bayis Sheni, not what took place by the Churban Bayis Rishon. Says Mishnah Berurah Kandal b'Tisha v'Laratzu ligzar gam b'Tisha. You might ask, so why don't we have a fast day on the 9th and another one on the 17th? Says the Chavetz Chaim, they didn't want to do that. De'en matrichin al hatzibur yoser midai, because it would be improper to place such an excessive burden on the people that they should have to fast both on the 9th and on the 17th. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schus of limud HaTorah should stand God's Klal Yisrael in good stead. The Rebbeinu Shalom should send refuas and yeshuas and parnasa to all those in need. And indeed, the Rebbeinu Shalom should allow us to be zocheh to see the bias goel tzedek b'meher v'yameinu, so that the halachos that we are presently learning should no longer be negeya, and we should only be learning them lahagdol Torah u'laha'adira. Be well.